They know every time Sacramento gets their hands on some power, they go and they, you give a mouse a cookie, they're going to want a glass of milk. And they are constantly going for more. They never relinquish that power. We see this with the congressional seats. The next thing they'll be doing is drawing their assembly seats. Just yesterday, we had a lawsuit that was dropped out in the media about a former staffer of the current Speaker of the Assembly, who talked about the corruption that was going on with the Speaker of the Assembly, including when it came to Prop 50, because he wanted to draw a congressional district that he could run in. This is power and corruption at its highest levels.
All right, guys, we are halfway through the work week. That's why I love these 3-day weekends. We should have a 3-day weekend like at least once a month. That's my new President Trump thing. Anyway, he had a big presser yesterday in the Oval Office, moving Spacecom officially from Colorado down to Alabama. And at the conference, he put to rest all these crazy rumors that he was dead, which, by the way, think about how insane this is. The guy played golf. There were pictures of him. He was truthing. He did a long press conference or interview with the Daily Caller. And yet, the left and all these nut jobs started talking about that because we hadn't seen him in like 10 minutes, that he was dead, but he crushed that rumor right away. We've got a big show on the tap for today. Now I'm going to talk about two big issues today. One is California redistricting. Gavin Newsom's got this plot to redraw the maps despite the voters' intent in California. This has consequences. I think it's going to come up short. If that happens, you're at least adding 5 seats to the House majority on the Republican side going into redistricting and potentially more. But this is a big deal because if it passes, it would wipe out all the gains that we'd make in Texas. So Jessica Millan Patterson, she's the former Republican chair in California. She's leading this effort. She's going to talk to us about what it's going to take. Then we're going to talk transgender issues as we get ready to go back to school with all these kids around the country, because Northern Virginia, where I am here, is fighting President Trump. America First legal Ian Pryor is here to push back. And then Concerned Women for America, Penny Nance, she is going to tell us what we need to know about that Minnesota transgender shooter that caused that tragedy last week. So a lot to get to. Before I get to it with Jessica, though, and by the way, a big panel discussion tomorrow, and then Chris Wilson going to give us the latest trends in polling on Friday's show. So a big week. But before I get into it with Jessica, you guys know this. If you are looking for a good night's sleep, which is critical to wellness, you can make a big difference in your routine. Every night before I go to bed, about 30 minutes before, I crush a little Beam Dream Powder. Look at this. This is 3 bags of it. And I got more upstairs, but I didn't want to push it too far with you guys. I love that. That's the cocoa cinnamon flavor. I've been using the brownie one lately, just so you know. But all of the flavors are amazing. And I'm not kidding. When I say amazing, I would drink this stuff all day long if it didn't put you to sleep. And that it does. Because 30 minutes before my head hits the pillow, I take 1 scoop, put it in the microwave for about 30 seconds. I use water. Some people like milk. I don't really care. It's just that good. However you like it. I've even taken it just straight with water and not even heated it up. But the thing is, it's got all natural ingredients: reishi, apigenin, L-theanine, magnesium, melatonin, all things you've probably tried before, but in one amazing, amazing blend. And that's what I'm saying. When I hit the pillow at night, 30 minutes after I take this, I'm out like a light. I sleep through the night and I wake up feeling rip-roaring, ready to go. Sleep is key to everything. And Beam's Dream Powder has transformed my life in terms of how I get a good night's sleep. So go to shopbeam.com/Spicer and use code word Spicer for 40% off at your first order at checkout. Trust me, guys, buy all the flavors, trust them, and stock up while you can. Go to shopbeam.com/Spicer and use code word Spicer. Without further ado, I want to bring in the chair of the No on 50 proposition movement in California and the former chairwoman of the California Republican Party, Jessica Millan Patterson. Jessica, good to see you. Welcome back to the show, albeit in a very different position.
Yeah, it's exciting. I was enjoying retirement, but I'm back. Gavin Newsom has brought me back in, and we're out here in California making sure that we don't gerrymander the entire state. I mean, we're old enough to remember when gerrymandering was a bad word. And Gavin Newsom's out here wearing it like a badge of honor.
Okay, so let's just before we get into the politics of it, give me the lay of the land. Like California, just give us the timeline. California voters passed an amendment that said that there was an independent commission, and then what happened? So what's the current law, and where are we now, and what's the timeline look like?
Here in California, we have the Citizens Redistricting Commission. And in 2008, the California voters decided to make the Citizens Redistricting Commission to draw the lines for our legislative districts. They believe that that power should not reside with politicians in Sacramento choosing their constituents, but rather with the people. In 2010, there was a second statewide ballot initiative where the voters decided to include Congress in that as well. So our Citizens Redistricting Commission has now gone through two drawings of maps. The last one was in 2021. Those are the districts that we are currently in. Gavin Newsom has decided that he would like to change the way that California looks. As you know, Sean, while I was chair of the California Republican Party, we worked really hard to build up Republicans here in California. In 2020 and 2022, we picked up 5 House seats. We secured the House majority for Speaker McCarthy. We registered over 1 million new Republicans here in California. Every single legislative district, every single congressional district, every single county in our state moved to the right. We've had an 89% success rate on statewide ballot initiatives where California voters were with the California Republican Party's position. Gavin Newsom understands that California voters know what he's up to. They are losing control up there in Sacramento, and this is a Sacramento power grab at its finest.
Okay, so on November 4th, I live in Virginia, when we vote, when New York City votes, and when New Jersey voters, you guys will vote too, right?
Correct.
Okay, so let's just get through a couple of the logistics here. When it passed the first time, this California Redistricting Commission in 2010, what was the vote of Californians to support this commission?
It was overwhelmingly supported by about 63%.
Okay, so 63%, but that was 15 years ago. So who knows? But obviously that was very clear. And so what, just again, for clarity purposes, what Newsom and the California legislature passed was an effort to say, we're going to disregard that and so give us voters permission this November to redraw the maps politically, despite the fact that you voted for this in the past, right?
Right. And the maps are already drawn. We've already seen the map. So it's not a question of how bad it will look. We know how bad it will look. We currently have 9 congressional members of the 52 congressional members in our state. You have to remember, for the first time in California state history, the last reapportionment, we lost a congressional district because more people were leaving our states and going to redder pastures around the country than were coming in. We are currently on track to lose 4 additional seats in the next reapportionment. So he took those 9 congressional seats and brought us down to essentially 4. And what he's also done, we have about 5 additional congressional seats right now that we would normally play in. So the high water mark would probably be about 14 seats. But he has turned all of those into deep blue seats. When you've got a district like Modoc, that includes something like Modoc County, which is one of the most remote and poorest counties in our state, that is in the same district as Marin County in the Bay Area, which is one of the most urban and wealthiest counties probably in the country. And you have the same congressional member that is supposed to be representing both of those areas. There's someone that's going to be left out. There are people whose voices will not be heard in Washington, D.C. because of this massive partisan gerrymandering that Gavin Newsom and his cronies have done.
So best estimation is right now you guys would lose 5 Republican seats and then not be able to compete for any of the other ones because he's made them blue. True?
Yeah, there's about, I would say, 1 congressional district that I would consider a swing after the gerrymandering.
Okay, so who, just to give us a sense of some names, like I know Kevin Kiley's been one of them. Daryl Issa, where does he sit on this? Who are the 5 that would lose their seats?
Right, so Kiley and LaMalfa are drawn out to the ocean. Those seats are both gone. David Valadeo, who is in the heart of the Central Valley, his district gets a lot more blue, would be very difficult to win. Congressman Calvert and Congresswoman Kim are drawn into the same district. And then Congressman Daryl Issa is drawn into a district that I would consider a swing district, but Kamala Harris certainly won it. You have to also remember, Sean, last year in 2024, California Democrats spent $146 million on those targeted seats that we're talking about. So if they win this in November, they stand to save about $500 million in the 26, 28, and 2030 election cycles.
That's real. Yeah. And I want to get into the money in a second, but let me just start with a straw man argument, which is the following. Texas went ahead and redistricted mid-cycle. They're getting 5 additional seats. And so if you hear Newsom and the left say, well, why can't we do it here in California? Why is it any different for us? What's your answer?
Well, I think that they're two totally different things. And I think it's something that the media has really been missing. Texas is redrawing their congressional district lines because the Department of Justice sent them a letter because they were in violation of the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment. Here in California, our Citizens Redistricting Commission takes the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment incredibly seriously. In fact, that's one of the first things that they look at. They want to make sure that communities of interest and minority communities have representation both in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. And that's why California has some of the most diverse delegations of the entire country. So it's two totally different things. They are doing it to fix a problem. We are doing it for complete partisan reasons.
Yeah, it's funny. We had Harmony Dillon on the show and talks about this case all the time. But I will say this, because as I'm listening to you, Jessica, I was thinking about this. The way you're describing it, it's actually beyond that even more interesting. Take the case away for a second in terms of the reason that Texas did it. I believe that Texas can make an argument that they are actually updating their representation, meaning they're actually drawing more Republican seats because the state is becoming more Republican and it's aligning to the people they represent. Whereas what Gavin Newsom's doing in California is actually the opposite, to your point. Like, he's actually reducing, as the state, under your leadership got more Republican in each of these counties and legislative districts, he's actually rolling back representation, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. It's actually completely the opposite of what Texas is doing.
Right. And when we lost a congressional district in that 2021 census, it ended up being a Democrat seat. So they lost 6 seats when we picked up 5. In Nancy Pelosi's home state, right? And what we see for the 2030-2031 reapportionment is that we will likely lose more Democrat seats in that time.
So let's talk about the money and the messaging for a second. What is it that you think it's going to cost to run a successful Prop 50 campaign?
Yeah, so it's an incredibly expensive endeavor here in California to run a statewide proposition. You know this, we have 2 of the most expensive media markets in the country. So generally speaking, you're looking at about $100 million that can be spent on each side. And the DCCC has already said that they're committed to doing that. So, we're working incredibly hard. There's a couple of different paths. Charles Munger Jr., who was the major proponent of the first 2 propositions in 08 and 10, he is protecting what I would call the Good Government Coalition, and he is really focused on that. And our job at Stop Sacramento's Power Grab, No on Prop 50, is we're going to be handling that right of center coalition. So it does cost a lot of money to run propositions here in California, but we're going to do everything that we can to protect our state and fight for it, because that's why we stay here.
So is that Charles Munger group the group that Arnold Schwarzenegger, the former governor, is he on that, in part of that group?
So I would say that Governor Schwarzenegger, and I used to work for him, he has always been kind of his own independent person. I think that if there was a place for him, it would certainly be in that Good Government Coalition, because he's bucked both parties. And he's always brought his own independent flair. He has always brought the glitz and the glamour to everything. So he's kind of in his own lane. And that's he brings a lot of people into that lane. But I think that you'll see him as a great messenger in that good government side of things.
So the combined groups, yours and him, is that $100 million all in or for each?
I think it would be $100 million all in. And we're working really hard every day to raise that money because it is an expensive endeavor to make sure we get our message out. The good news is we start from a position of strength. You probably saw the Politico poll just 2 weeks ago. 63% of Californians want to keep the Citizens Redistricting Commission. Every single poll that the Democrats seem to put out there, they're not really coming from a place of strength. When you start a yes on campaign, you want to start somewhere in the mid 60s. Their first poll had them at 52%. And when you looked at strong support versus soft support, they were down around 33%. Our job still is to make sure that our voters are educated and that we turn them out.
So if you get 50 plus 1 on this ballot, so people are voting yes on 50 or no on 50?
No on 50.
Okay, so no on 50. If 50% plus 1, you guys win, right? So so there's no threshold they have to meet, like super majority or anything like that. Okay, and if they do it, it automatically happens then, right?
If they pass
it, then automatically those maps.
Then those maps go into effect. I'm sure there will be some sort of legal, maneuvering following it if they were able to pass this. But I think California voters are really smart. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to have it. And as I mentioned, with our statewide ballot initiatives, California voters have been with the conservative position in the last cycle 89% of the time. They know what Sacramento has done to our beautiful state. And they're with us when it comes to common sense things like partisan gerrymandering.
So is the other side, the Gavin Newsom side, are they raising $100 million of their own?
Yeah, so the Democrats are committed to being around that number, and we've already seen transfers from Washington D.C. and other elite millionaires and 100 millionaires sending their money to their cause. So we're going to have to work on this. A lot of it will be grassroots, but also a lot of our big donors will have to be engaged on this to make sure that we hold on to these seats. The House majority has always ran through California.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm worried about. If they win this thing, then we're at best back to square one. But to your point, then we take a lot of other. I guess what I'm getting at is, it seems to me between all this money that's being spent, plus to your point, if you shore up those other blue seats that he did in these new maps, it seems like this is real money that could affect other races, throughout the country, because donors. Money is fungible. So if you're not spending it in California, you could spend it in Missouri or New York or Florida or wherever.
You're never going to get the landscape that we have here in California where there's so many competitive seats. And the Citizens Redistricting Commission allows us to do that. They take into consideration the demographics of each part of our state. As you know, we have an incredibly diverse state. Some would even say, we're multiple states. Where the inland portion of our state is incredibly Republican and that coastal portion is very blue. So when you will never get that type of landscape because you just don't have that type of demographics anywhere else in the country. So with us, we need to protect these seats.
Okay, so this is going to be a low turnout race, right? Because it's you're just voting on propositions. So what's the message right now? I guess let's start with this before I get to the actual messaging on this. Are you guys Prop 50 because there's 49 things before you, or is that just a number that you wanted?
So we didn't want any of this, Sean. Like, we would not be here if Gavin Newsom wasn't doing this. And this is the Democrat legislature. They chose the number.
So are there, what else is on the ballot?
It's literally a special election for this proposition only.
They named it 50?
Yes.
Why? Because they 50 states?
I had no idea.
So like, if you're a California voter, the only reason you'll go to on November 4th to vote is because of this. Yes. Okay. So, and you guys, do you have early and mail-in voting that would be part of this?
We're all mail-in. And
all mail-in?
We have all mail-in, and we have vote centers around our state. So this is going to be a turnout trail. You have to remember, when we did the recall back in 2021, we had like above 50% turnout. It was rather high. So, people are paying attention. They know every time Sacramento gets their hands on some power, they go and you give a mouse a cookie, they're going to want a glass of milk. And they are constantly going for more. They never relinquish that power. We see this with the congressional seats. The next thing they'll be doing is drawing their assembly seats. Just yesterday, we had a lawsuit that was dropped out in the media about a former staffer of the current Speaker of the Assembly, who talked about the corruption that was going on with the Speaker of the Assembly, including when it came to Prop 50, because he wanted to draw a congressional district that he could run in. This is power and corruption at its highest levels. And you're going to see more about this coming out over the next several weeks. California voters need to stay smart and keep the power with the people and not with politicians.
Right. Jessica, let me ask you this. What is give me the if you're a California voter, give me as objectively as you can, what's the message that you want to send to them to motivate somebody to go out and vote on this? And what's the Gavin Newsom side saying? Let's just start with the Gavin Newsom side. Are they just saying, hey, Texas did it, play your part in trying to take a House majority?
They're going to save democracy. That is what they are saying. Exactly.
All right. So what's your side saying?
Our side is that this power resides with the people. Every single time we give power to Sacramento, they fail us, whether it's our children's schools, the homeless crisis, affordability, education, public safety. California Democrats in Sacramento have failed us. We give them this power, they will fail us again.
Okay. I want to ask you one more question that has nothing to do with redistricting. Bill Pulte, the federal housing director, has been exposing Democrats who have mortgage fraud. Lisa Cook, the Fed Gov, Tish James, the New York Attorney General. But I believe that Adam Schiff is also committing electoral fraud because the Constitution requires him to live in the state of California. He has signed a document saying his primary residence is in Maryland. Is there an interest among California voters to make the case that he cannot legally represent them because he is claiming his primary residence is in Maryland?
I mean, I think that is kind of a no-brainer. We went through this with our senator who was appointed by Governor Newsom. And I think that this is something that is important to Californians. You know, we have to put up with the high costs of living here. You know, sending our kids to schools that are subpar, walking down the street and visibly seeing the homeless crisis. You know, the crime that fortunately California's voted for Prop 36 in the last cycle. So I think this is something that is really important to Californians. We want someone that's representing us in Washington, D.C. that has to live the life that we live here in California and has to go through the same types of struggles that we go through as Californians. So I think it's something that would be really appealing to Californians.
Good. All right. Well, let's check back in as this race gets closer, because I think this is literally the balance of power is in the hands of this ballot initiative in terms of the majority, Republican majority in Congress. So best of luck. Stay in touch with us as we get closer to November 4th.
Sounds great. Always great to be with you, Sean.
Hey, by the way, for people who, if they want to help, where do they go to give you money?
Go to stop50.org. Stop50.org.
Stop50.org. All right, Jessica Millan Patterson, thanks a lot. And stop50.org is our site to go to today. Thank you very much. All right, guys, great discussion with her. Now let's move on to these transgender issues that schools in Northern Virginia are fighting President Trump on. They're in court today. And then we'll get into it with Penny Nance of Concerned Women for America, because there are a lot of big transgender issues with respect to that tragedy in Minnesota last week. But before I get into that, guys, just one quick note. I mean, I'm telling you, whether it's steaks, eggs, omelets, vegetables, you want to turn it up a notch, get one of these little bad boys. This is from Firecracker Farm hot salt. All you do is push this at the top right here, and it releases the powerful blend of the most amazing spices that you've ever seen. It's hot salt. So you've got three types: Scorpion, Reaper, and Ghost. And they're not kidding. Megyn Kelly's talked about it. Joe Rogan's talked about it. This stuff sold out weeks ago, and it is back in stock in small batch orders right now. So you've got to try this. It will take your food to a new level. You go to firecracker.farm, not .org, not .edu, not anything. It's firecracker.farm and use code SPICER for a discount. This stuff is going to change the way you have steaks, eggs, vegetables, chicken, you name it. One little, shot of that thing, and it's going to transform your dining experience. Go to firecracker.farm, use code SPICER for a major show and listener discount. All right, without further ado, I want to bring in America First Legal, Ian Pryor. Ian, good to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again, Sean.
So look, back to school is pretty much kicked off, I think, everywhere. I know here in Virginia, we're now like a weekend. My understanding is that there's 5 jurisdictions, maybe I'm off on that, in Northern Virginia that are not abiding by this transgender executive order issued by the president.
Yeah, that's correct. So I think it was January or February, America First Legal sent a letter to the Department of Education highlighting these 5 school districts that still are maintaining these policies that say, look, a transgender or a gender expansive, whatever that definition is, student can use the bathroom of their choice. They can use the locker room of their choice. And a couple of weeks later, the Department of Education opened an investigation into those 5 school districts. And then in late July, the Department of Education said, you're in violation of Title IX. These policies are in violation of Title IX. You have 10 days to come within compliance, or you're going to lose your federal funding. There was another extension granted in there, but ultimately in August, the schools all said, you know what, we're not going to comply. And now what we had last Friday was 2 of those school districts, Fairfax County Public Schools and Arlington County Public Schools, have sued the Department of Education, asking the court for an injunction to prevent the federal government from withholding those federal funds, which are in violation of Title IX.
So what is the reaction of, like, say, parents?
Well, it's interesting. In Loudoun Now, which is a local newspaper here, they ran a survey last week and they printed it in their publication this week. And the question was, if the federal government withholds money based on these policies, do you support the local board of supervisors backfilling that money? And 80% said no, just like we thought. It's an 80-20 issue. I think the vast majority of people do not want these policies in place. They're sick of talking about it. It's been 5 years. It obviously doesn't work. It's a bone of contention everywhere. Yet this loud, vocal minority that has found its way onto school boards and into school administrations continues to force this down students' throats, teachers' throats, and ultimately parents' throats.
So in Arlington, you mentioned there was this a registered sex offender who was allowed to repeatedly stroll into a girls' high school. Winsome Sears, the current lieutenant governor, who is the nominee for governor, spoke at a meeting there. Let's take a look at what she had to say.
What's happening in our schools right now is just wrong. It's dangerous, it's insane, and it has to stop. Here's the truth. There are 2 sexes, boys and girls, and for generations we've understood this, that they deserve their own sports teams, their own locker rooms, their own bathrooms. That's not discrimination, it is common sense. But here in Arlington, the trust between parents and schools is being broken. When girls lose their privacy, when boys are punished for speaking plain truth, when parents are silenced for simply asking questions, that's not education, that's indoctrination. You are one of the 5 Nova school districts who have been found in violation of Title IX. Title IX was written to protect biological girls' spaces and opportunities on the basis of biological sex, not gender identity. And by refusing to reverse your reckless policies, you are failing our daughters and risking losing millions of dollars in funding our children. This is not theoretical. Right here in Arlington, a convicted child sex offender walked into a high school girls' locker room and exposed himself to young girls. That is the reality. That is the danger. And it's about keeping schools focused on reading, writing, and math, not ideology.
So, Ian, what I don't understand is this debate is largely about boys claiming to be girls and going into the thing. This is a 58-year-old sex offender. This shouldn't be, I can't believe that there is not just unequivocal outrage on this one. That to me is like not even should be open for discussion. Why is this not evoking a sense of outrage within the community? If somebody said there's a 58-year-old registered sex offender in the girls' bathroom and no one has, I mean, I just can't believe that this is even up for discussion.
Well, I think you look at where it happens, right? It happens in Arlington County. And, there were school board meetings after that issue was reported. And you actually did have Democrats coming out and saying, this is ridiculous. This needs to end. But the problem is when you find yourself in Alexandria or Arlington County or Fairfax County, you're surrounded by these radical activists that will seek to destroy you if you dare protest these issues, right? And it's a little different in Loudoun and Prince William, where I think it's a little bit more balanced. But people are afraid to go out. They're afraid to make noise over these issues because of the reaction that they will get from the left. I mean, at that same Winsome Sears meeting that she attended, obviously there was the protester out in the school board outside of it and said, look, if trans can't use your bathrooms, blacks can't use my water fountain. I mean, that is so disgustingly racist, but that is what people are up against when you look at Arlington County, Alexandria County, Fairfax County.
It's amazing to me. I know that Richard Johnson, the chair of Black Entertainment TV, who's been a big Democratic supporter in the past, came out to literally stand with Winsome because that sign was so outrageous. That literally to claim that if you don't stand with trans, then you are supporting segregated bathrooms.
Well, that's what you get. It's the ultimate gaslighting from these school boards, from these school administrators, and from the minority of people that support these radical policies. And they do it in various different ways. But their main way of doing it is they cite back to this case that is 5 years old from the Fourth Circuit. And this is called Grimm versus Gloucester County. It involved a girl that wanted to use a boys' room. The school board said, no, you can't. We're going to pass a policy that says sex segregated bathrooms. Now, that decision, as wrongly decided as it was very specific, right? This kid had persistently, consistently, insistently is the language they use, identified as a male, had a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, had a change made on the birth certificate. It went through all these steps. Now, what these school districts do, however, is they say, well, look, if you're transgender or gender expansive, and they don't really have much of a definition for gender expansive. The best we've been able to figure out is you identify as some gender that's not on the male-female binary. Okay, well, if you identify as a gender that's not on the male-female binary, then why are you using a female restroom if you're a male? You don't even identify as a female. You're something else. It's nuts. These policies are all over the place. They do nothing to verify anything with these students. And what these schools have done is they've allowed the students to interpret and implement these policies themselves.
You bring up an interesting point. I hadn't even thought about this. So you have a boys' room and a girls' room, right? If someone doesn't identify as either one, what would be your solution to what they should do? Because I think you hear this now that I'm gender fluid. I don't identify as anyone. And so what would be the suggestion to how they have to deal with, a school day?
Well, the normal common sense solution here is that they have the option of using a private restroom. But instead, these school districts have turned logic and common sense on its head. And so we actually represent a client in Fairfax County against Fairfax County Public Schools who's suing for this exact reason. You had somebody who doesn't identify as transgender, doesn't identify as a female, but wanted to use the girls' common restroom. And when this female complained, the school said, well, you can use the private restroom. I mean, that's how they're applying their policies. It's not even limited to the so-called transgender students. It's just an open bathroom policy. They are applying these policies to open up sex segregated bathrooms to anyone who wants to use it. And, by the nature of their policies, if somebody is gender fluid, right, they're a boy one week and a girl the next week, they can use either bathroom based on how they feel that week. There's no limitations whatsoever.
I think about like all the shenanigans that went on in high school. And it's like you could do something and then get caught and say, oh, well, for that moment, I was identifying as a girl. That's why I was in the girls' room peeping on them.
Well, exactly. And it invites that, right? It invites, it incentivizes ways that students can say, well, I'm using the girls' room because I don't really like the boys' room. They're all vaping in the boys' room. I'm going to use the girls' room, or for more nefarious reasons. The problem here is when you create a policy that, as I said, is being implemented and enforced by the student body, you have absolutely no control and you make everybody uncomfortable. And there's a reason why these policies have been front and center for 5 years is because they're insane. Nobody supports them. And fortunately, the Supreme Court has taken up a case, West Virginia versus BPJ, which, while that has to do with, boys and girls sports, is ultimately, hopefully, going to get to the heart of the issue, which is, does Title IX, when it says sex, does it mean biological sex, or does it mean something else? Does the Equal Protection Clause apply to biological sex, or does it mean something that, nobody in the 1800s could have ever possibly imagined?
Last week we saw this tragic shooting in Minnesota of Annunciation Catholic School. And the Washington Post was covering it, and they referred to the shooter as, I forgot what his name is now, but then they said, who was assigned male at birth. And I'm like assigned at birth, as if like it was a lottery. Like, you get the blue one, you get the red one, you get the blue, you get you're not assigned birth. It blows my mind. Like, this debate has lost a lot of credibility, but I also think that anyone who says that you're just assigned, like the doctor walks in and makes a judgment, like, okay, you're a male. No, there's actual science behind this and biology behind it. And I feel like we get eviscerated by these guys who talk about following the science and Right. And then these are the same people who want to be like, you're just assigned birth.
Yeah. And, a couple of years ago, I discovered this book that was in all the school libraries. I think it was called It Feels Good to Be Yourself. And it's like a cartoon book, and it's geared towards, K through third grade. And it's, this 5-year-old, they're explaining to the 5-year-old, like, it's okay if you think you're a girl. The doctor really guessed when you were born, but we're going to affirm your identity as a girl, as a 5-year-old child. I mean, that's how far down this insane ideology we have come. Like, a doctor is guessing based on what we've all known since the beginning of mankind to be male versus female. And you're right. It seems like as we came out of COVID and everyone's saying, follow the science, follow the science, follow the science. And then for everything else, they're like, accept this science. We don't want you to follow the easy biology 101 science.
I remember all the games that I played, like Cops and Robbers, and it's like, he was assigned cop. And I mean, what's that? It's so insane. But it's worse than that. There's in Fairfax, you mentioned some of the issues they're dealing with transgender, but there are school staff that are allegedly arranging abortions for minors without parental consent. What is going on in these Northern Virginia schools? I just am blown away at what's going on.
Well, I think fundamentally you're looking at public school administrators and staffers believing that they can parent children, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. And this kind of thing didn't happen in the 80s and 90s when we went to school, right? But now schools view themselves as, a substitute for the parent, and they're going to make judgments that, a parent may not make, that a parent has the right to make, and they're going to substitute their own judgment. And so when you look at something like Fairfax, I mean, that's horrific. That is against the law. It's a violation of parents' 14th Amendment rights. There's case law directly on point there, but they continue to do it. And unfortunately, with these school districts, they will continue to do it unless they get sued and unless a court orders them to stop. Even if you get a decision from, say, like the Supreme Court that says, well, this is unconstitutional. Well, these school districts will figure out a way to say, well, that doesn't apply to us, so we're going to keep doing it until we get sued. And that's really what we're looking at here. These school districts took a very narrow, albeit wrongly decided, Fourth Circuit decision and said, okay, we're going to take that decision and we're going to expand it beyond what the court even said should be expanded. And we're going to wait and we're going to see if we got sued. And it's surprising that people haven't sued on this before, because it is a clear shot to invalidate these policies.
Let me ask you a question. If you walked into Fairfax County Schools right now as a student, or Arlington, Loudoun, who cares? And the kid says to the school nurse, I have a headache. Can I have some aspirin? Can they legally give the aspirin to the kid?
Well, they have to get parental permission first. I mean, you look at all their regulations. If you're going to give the kid a Tylenol, you've got to get parental permission. If you're going to, quote, affirm this kid's gender identity, no, you don't have to get parental permission.
Or give them, allow them an abortion, which is a medical procedure. So you can't give them a Tylenol, but you can have them do life-altering stuff to their body.
That's correct. That is how these schools see themselves.
That's also insane. So let me just ask you this. You mentioned, what is the pushback? Like, you're a parent out there and you're saying, I see this going on at my school. What do you do as a parent?
Well, look, I think, we've seen over the past 5 years, parents going to school board meetings, certainly electing school board members that are going to reject this insane ideology would be step one. But it's very difficult in places like this, right? It's very difficult to get people off the couch or to get people to pay attention to these issues long enough to go and vote out their school board. So that's problematic in Northern Virginia. But the other issue is just sue these schools. They need to be taken to court. And I can tell you right now, these policies, they are in the end game right now. I liken them to, it's a dog, right? The dog's 15, 16 years old. Look, the dog doesn't have much time left, and you got to make a decision. Do you want to spend $10,000 to get the dog an extra 10 months of sort of miserable living? Or, is it time that, maybe the dog unfortunately gets put down? And I think that's where these policies are, right? They need to go. But unfortunately, what you're seeing is these school systems spending so much money to fight what ultimately will end. And I guarantee by this time next year, we'll be talking about these policies in the past tense.
I hope so. Thanks for everything that you guys at America First Legal are doing on this. Ian Pryor, really appreciate you being with us.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
All right, to further this conversation, I want to bring in the president of Concerned Women for America, who's been leading so many of these cultural issues, Penny Nance. Penny, welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Sean. Thanks again for having me.
So I was talking to Ian about this whole issue of transgender and how these schools in Northern Virginia aren't complying. But it got me thinking back to last week, that tragic shooting at Annunciation Catholic School. And I know the media didn't want to talk about the transgender issue with respect to the shooter, but it seems like we were hiding from a real discussion about this, because in my mind, there's somewhat of a pattern that we're seeing between Nashville and this one now. And yet we're sort of, no one wants to have this public conversation in the legacy media.
That's 100% correct. Let me first go back and say President Trump is doing a great job on this. And recently we've had 20 of these gender clinics shut down because of President Trump's executive order. So a lot is happening, but a lot needs to be done in the CDC, NIH, and the medical communities. You're right. Something's happening. I started doing some research just recently because here we are again. I mean, the shocking and horrific story coming out of Minnesota. And again, it's a young man who identifies as a girl. We don't know what he's on as far as cross-sex hormones, as far as psychotropic drugs. Like, we don't know this, but we know there's a pattern. I discovered there's been about 60 mass shootings, and that's if you really, define it correctly, in the last 7 years. At least 7 of those, and I say at least because the media goes to great lengths to cover up what the real numbers are. They shield a lot of these shooters from being outed, honestly. So we know at least 7 of these have been trans or non-binary. We never hear what kind of drugs they're on. But I think what's super interesting, Sean, is about half of those have been women. I mean, that is a crazy number. Women tend to not ever commit violent crime. I mean, the vast majority of violent crime in this country, in the U.S., is committed by men, over 80%. So the fact that about half of these have been done by women who we know are on major doses of testosterone, we're not talking about what's in plain sight. We have a mental illness that the American Psychiatric Association does not want to identify as a real illness in the DSM-5. And we have kids that are on drugs, on cross-sex hormones, and we're not actually having the conversation, and the government and CDC, NIH are not looking into the root causes of this violence that's being perpetrated on our nation.
But you guys at Concerned Women for America, I mean, this is the kind of stuff you guys have been leading this fight for a long time, well before it became cool. So what is the next step? Because to your point, we're not talking about the drugs. And in any other case, if somebody was shooting up something, we'd be saying, what were they on? What was happening? Do you think it's because they're on these hormone and other prescription drugs that we're not
I
having
do.
a conversation?
I do. In fact, and listen, I'm not an expert on this. This is why I'm calling the experts to account on this, right? Look, we don't know. I had a conversation with a person who was a drug rep for about 20 years, selling some of these psychotropic drugs and SSRIs to doctors. And she told me that the dirty secret is in the fine print that suicidal ideation and violent ideation can be something that occurs when people take these drugs, especially young people 18 to 35, especially high numbers. Well, add that to high doses of testosterone in young women or estrogen and others in young men. And it seems like there's something that is occurring, but the media doesn't want to face it. And it has not been given the correct attention by the medical associations and the medical community, because they're making so much money on all this gender transition ideology and on these drugs. President Trump, again, I have to go back to where we started, Sean, is doing a great job on this. And you're starting to see these clinics close down. Great Britain is way ahead of us because they already started this and saw what happened to their countrymen because of it. We've got to catch up to where Great Britain is. They took it out of the national health system because, again, it was hurting people. We have to, and the final thing I would strongly encourage is we have to change the laws that do not allow medical professionals, to psychologists and others, to actually counsel these young people who have gender dysphoria. In some states, it's illegal for a licensed professional to say to them, I think you're confused. You're a boy. Let's have a conversation about that. Why are you having these feelings? I mean, that is literally illegal in California. So we have a lot to do here, but I think we've really got to call the medical community to account.
In 30 seconds or less, I think that to me, it's always about the money. No matter what the issue is, I'll go find the root cause. It's always the money. But to your point, the default is to give you the drug and to affirm you. And that's why they call it gender-affirming care, not to sort of make sure you want to go down that. And I think that's part of the problem, is that just because, children want things all the time, and a job of a parent is to discern what's in their best interest, not just to affirm them whatever the decision. And I think that's the other problem, is that the default right now is just give them whatever they want. So, whether it's a phone or social media or gender affirming care, just give them it and they'll be fine. And we keep seeing in each of these areas that it's a problem. Penny, I got to say, I've said this before, you guys at Concerned Women for America have been leading the fight on these culture wars, and all the moms that are out there watching this, these are the people, Penny and her team at Concerned Women for America, have been fighting these fights before they make it into the mainstream. And I got to tell you, if you want to help, go to concernedwomen.org/Spicer. You get a copy of Penny's book for a donation of $20 or more. And the more generous you can be, the more you can not just get a free book out of this, but you can actually help them set up more chapters, keep up the fight, spread the word. Because to Penny's point, guys, there's not a lot of people sounding the alarm, and the folks at Concerned Women for America are the ones leading this effort. So you get a copy of $20 or more if you go to concernedwomen.org/Spicer. You get a copy of her book, A Woman's Guide, 7 Rules for Success, Business, and Life, and you get to support the great work that they're doing. Penny, thanks again for everything you guys are doing. I appreciate it. And guys, we got a great panel discussion tomorrow. Chris Wilson will be here on Friday to go through the latest data and polling on the top political races, what President Trump is doing, what are the headwinds he's facing. You're not going to want to miss that. So thank you for being here. See you back here tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.